SpaceX gives an update on its Starship lunar lander following last week's drama with NASA's acting administrator, Blue Origin tests New Glenn ahead of its second flight, and Japan launches its newest resupply spacecraft as the International Space Station celebrates 25 years of continued human presence. Happy Halloween! It's the only time that orbital decay actually sounds festive. We've got all those stories and more coming up this week in Spaceflight. This week, Blue Origin is making progress towards New Glenn's second flight by testing the full rocket ahead of launch. Despite it being New Glenn's second launch, it's actually been in the works for quite some time. The second stage was sent to Launch Complex 36 in April and static fired on the 24th of that month. Blue uses the same launch pad and systems for launch, so they don't need a separate test site for the second stage since it's too large to transport outside the Cape. Over the summer, Blue completed testing of the booster's aft and forward modules, testing the fin systems, the attitude control thrusters, and the landing legs ahead of integration with the tanks. New Glenn's second flight is set to launch NASA's ESCAPADE mission, which will study how solar wind affects the loss of Mars's atmosphere. To prevent the need to launch during a planetary window, New Glenn will launch the two ESCAPADE spacecraft to the Earth-Sun Lagrange Point 2, and there, the spacecraft will loiter and wait until the planets are aligned before flying themselves to the Red Planet. On September 22nd, Rocket Lab announced that the twin spacecraft had once again arrived in Florida after originally being sent last year when ESCAPADE was supposed to launch during the 2024 Mars window on New Glenn's first flight. On October 8th, the rocket's first stage was rolled out to LC-36 for integration with the second stage and installation on the rocket's transporter erector. By October 22nd, these steps had already been completed given the updates from Blue Origin. So with both stages mated and on the transporter erector, on October 29th, the rocket rolled out to the pad and went vertical once again at LC-36, ready for the rocket's full stack pre-launch testing to begin on October 30th. That testing culminated in a roughly 25-second static fire test at 21:59 local time. It wasn't without issue, though, as the company had a first static fire attempt about 2 hours earlier that aborted right at ignition. Thankfully, teams were able to quickly recycle while still within the test window, and, come to think of it, there were quite a few attempts on the first flight campaign, so it was nice that it all happened on the first day of testing. If all went well and Blue is satisfied with the test data, then New Glenn should be brought horizontal and rolled back to the hangar for payload integration. Of note, the fairing used by the rocket during the test was dedicated just for testing and not for flight. The actual fairings have been at the Astrotech facility and are being prepared for encapsulation around the ESCAPADE spacecraft. Ahead of launch, Blue Origin's drone ship Jacqueline and support ship Harvey Stone will also depart Port Canaveral and head to the booster landing zone. For this flight, Blue hopes that the lessons learned from the first flight's landing attempt will help the second landing attempt to be successful, but as the booster's name indicates, never tell me the odds. Hopefully, if all goes well, Blue will give us a launch date in the coming days so we can all mark it on our calendars. Of course, most, if not all, of these upcoming activities will also be visible on our Space Coast Live 24/7 stream, and we'll have a dedicated launch stream with commentary for New Glenn's second flight too. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss that among the many other things that we do here at NSF. Blue is also sharing further information about their first Blue Moon Mark 1 lander mission. This week on social media, the company published an update stating that they'd completed testing of the lander's navigation systems in Mojave. The test was performed by strapping a heavily instrumented test pod under a plane and flying over the Mojave Desert and Sierra Nevada mountains. The test pod was equipped with the complete navigation suite of sensors that'll be flown on Blue Moon Mark 1, which allows Blue to test all of that hardware as if it were looking down towards the lunar surface. According to CEO Dave Limp, these areas, quote, provide an excellent representation of the lunar geological features. He says the test pod includes inertial measurement units, star trackers, LiDAR altimeters, a GPS receiver, and a flight computer identical to the one that will be running navigation and flight software on Mark 1. It's not unheard of for companies to try and test their navigation systems by attempting to mimic the lunar surface, either through natural features on Earth or by building a custom area for testing. For example, companies like Firefly have done the latter while testing the navigation systems for their Blue Ghost lander, and that one seemed to have worked pretty well considering that it successfully landed back in March. These systems are crucial to enable a precise and gentle landing on the moon. Otherwise, if your navigation system fails, your lander might end up a bit more like Intuitive Machines' Nova C landers. That is, sideways on the moon, or worse. Recently, there have been quite a number of landers that have failed precisely because of sensor issues, software going the wrong way, and other stuff like that. So here's hoping that Blue has done everything they could to cover all potential cases with Blue Moon Mark 1. Last week, we covered all of the drama surrounding NASA's acting administrator Sean Duffy opening up the contract for the Artemis III Human Landing System. As we reported, NASA gave Blue and SpaceX until October 29th to deliver acceleration approaches for their Human Landing System landers. And if you look at the calendar, well, that date has come and gone, so what are the proposals? Well, we don't know, or at least not as of recording. But that said, SpaceX may have taken those comments by Duffy a lot more seriously than their CEO's reactions on X. This Thursday, the company published an update on its website explaining their progress with NASA's Human Landing System and the milestones performed until now. The update includes new renders of the Starship HLS interior, the different variants of Starship that'll be used for the mission, and a lot of other cool stuff. But the important parts are in the text update. This emphasizes the two-path approach that SpaceX is taking with this program. The most important of these paths is, of course, making the basic Starship rocket system work. That includes not just launching and demonstrating that it can deploy payloads or change its orbit in space, but also that it can return so it can be reused and thus enable the high launch tempo needed for on-orbit refilling. Now, this is something that SpaceX has been trying to perfect over the last several years, first with subscale launches, then with full-stack flights. Looking ahead, SpaceX has Starship version 3, which is designed based on the lessons learned from previous flights and will be able to do even more than the past versions of the rocket. SpaceX remarked that among all of the flight and ground testing, they've built more than 36 Starships, 600 Raptor rocket engines, and have had more than 226,000 seconds of runtime with Raptor 2 and more than 40,000 seconds of runtime with Raptor 3. They also emphasized the large-scale investment in Starship's future with production sites, launch sites, and test sites in Texas, Florida, and California. In other words, it's not just what we've already seen or what we see right now, but rather there's going to be a lot more to look forward to in the future. But without a lander, all of this work is moot, so the second path is actually getting it built. A lot of the core systems are common to the regular Starship vehicle, so SpaceX has also been working on systems such as airlock design, elevator design, crew displays, and much more. In the update, they list several milestones that have already been completed, many of which we've covered here at NSF either through This Week in Spaceflight or our Starbase update shows. Some of those new milestones included, for example, testing of the landing leg system for HLS into simulated lunar regolith. They've worked on other critical systems as well, such as the landing navigation software and sensors. Remember the previous section about Blue's Mark 1 lander and how we said that it's not uncommon for companies to do testing of that hardware and software? Well, this is exactly that, but for Starship. In fact, there's even a picture on the website which shows this very navigation testing. Now, we could of course go milestone by milestone, but it would take quite a while and we have other news to get to. But it does just go to show that there was indeed a lot of work going on behind the scenes that we just didn't know about. So with so much testing, HLS must be close, right? Well, we still don't have any timelines from this update, but we do have an idea of what to look for soon. For example, SpaceX mentions that they've already started building a flight article of the HLS crew cabin that'll include every subsystem that the actual HLS ship will have. So at some point, we're probably going to see that somewhere around Starbase, just like we saw the previous two lower fidelity mock-ups that SpaceX built in the last 5 years. Another thing that we have yet to see is progress on Path 1 that we talked about before. Version 3 is right around the corner, so it's still got to fly a few times and get tested, but SpaceX will likely use that data to inform the test schedule. So at some point, here's hoping next year, SpaceX will perform an on-orbit refilling test using version 3's docking interfaces, navigation sensors, and thruster layout. For this test, SpaceX will kill two birds with one stone. First, flying Starship as part of the long-duration endurance flight that was in the campaign for HLS. This long endurance test will conclude with the launch of a second ship that will dock to the first one and then test on-orbit refilling. These two flights were originally separate tests running at different times, so SpaceX changing the schedule and compressing it, turning it into one unified test, might point to efforts by the company to condense schedules. Things like this indicate that SpaceX is making moves to accelerate the Starship HLS schedule, just as NASA wanted. In fact, the update says that, quote, "In response to the latest calls, we've shared and are formally assessing a simplified mission architecture and concept of operations that we believe will result in a faster return to the moon while simultaneously improving crew safety." Now, this doesn't give a whole lot of details about the specifics of the accelerated plan, but there is at least a written commitment that they'll try to accelerate the schedules. And now to Ryan for some late-breaking news.
Thanks, Alicia. Not only did we get these awesome new renders and juicy information to respond to the current acting NASA Administrator, Sean Duffy, but SpaceX has also just responded to some recent criticisms from a former NASA Administrator, Jim Bridenstine.
It is extraordinarily complex.
Now, you may recall Jim Bridenstine already hit out at Starship at a Senate hearing last month. We covered that over on the Breaking Space channel. Well, this month he has continued to share his disapproval of the company's lander. Responding to Bridenstine's less than kind remarks in a thread on X, SpaceX argues that his comments are less from the perspective of a former NASA administrator, but rather as a lobbyist for traditional space companies. The last post says it all, quote, "A paid lobbyist's effort to secure billions more in government funding for his clients who are already years late and billions of dollars over budget. I'm sure this will likely lead to more drama in the future regarding HLS, but that's something we can cover in the future when that happens. But for now, back to Alicia."
NSF also approached Blue Origin for comment on their own plans to potentially accelerate their capability of landing humans on the moon as part of their Artemis contract, but unfortunately, we've not heard anything back from them yet. If we do, we'll talk about it as soon as possible. We also asked NASA about what the agency received from both companies. A NASA spokesperson got back to us and said that they'd received said proposals and that a committee of subject matter experts is being assembled to evaluate the proposals and to determine the best path forward. Additionally, once the ongoing government shutdown ends, the agency will issue a request for information to the broader industry for their proposals, something that NASA already indicated last week. So given this, there is at least some preparation work ongoing right now. Let's just hope that the decision is made as soon as possible. We'll also go into much more detail about some of the specific information that SpaceX gave in this update on the next Starbase update. So keep that in mind and stay tuned for that episode when it airs. Japan's new HTV-X cargo resupply vehicle berthed at the International Space Station for the first time this week. The spacecraft was launched last Sunday aboard the first H3 rocket to feature 4 solid rocket boosters after being delayed for almost a week due to bad weather at the Tanegashima Space Launch Center. The HTV-X is the successor to Japan's HTV cargo spacecraft, which supplied the ISS on 9 missions between 2009 and 2020. Both cargo vehicles were developed by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which also developed the H3 rocket that launched the craft last week. The HTV-X is a significant redesign that was once hoped to fly by 2021. However, delays with the H3 launcher caused its maiden launch to slip even further. The spacecraft measures around 8 meters in length. That's almost the same as the Cygnus XL, but with a wider diameter. This increases the cargo capacity of its predecessor by around a third, with 5.8 tons of pressurized supplies, or up to 7.2 tons including unpressurized payloads. Unlike the original HTV, the new version can also support late loading of cargo as little as 24 hours before launch, and it can also provide power to its payloads during transit. The Japanese Space Agency's astronaut Kimiya Yui used the Canadarm2 robotic arm to capture and berth the vehicle at the station's Harmony port on Wednesday, October 30th. The craft will usually remain berthed for up to 6 months, but this first one may only spend around half that time at the station. When it does leave the ISS, HTV-X is designed to remain in orbit for up to 18 months before re-entering. It'll use this extra time to conduct on-orbit experiments or technical demonstrations. With the ISS reaching the end of its useful life in around 5 years' time, you might wonder what the future holds for the HTV-X. Well, the Japanese space agency JAXA has described HTVX as being utilized for post-ISS human space activities in low Earth orbit, and it plans to use the craft to provide cargo transportation to the Lunar Gateway using a version sometimes referred to as the HTV-XG. The Gateway is planned to accommodate up to 4 astronauts for 30-day stays in a near rectilinear halo orbit around the Moon. To get there, HTV-XG will still launch on an upgraded version of the H3 rocket. Mitsubishi published designs for the evolution of its H3 rocket several years ago, which support the potential for lunar cargo missions. These include dual missions of the H3, launching a transfer stage that would mate with the separately launched cargo craft to perform a translunar injection burn. They also include proposals for a more powerful H3 Heavy variation with 3 cores, which would remove the need for this additional stage. But all of that is far in the future. For now, HTVX's destination of choice is the International Space Station. And on the subject of hanging around at the ISS, the orbiting outpost is about to celebrate a significant milestone of its own next week. On November 2nd, there will have been a continuous human presence on the ISS for the past 25 years. The first resident crew, Expedition 1, docked on November 2nd, 2000, aboard the Soyuz TM-31 spacecraft. On board were NASA's Bill Shepard and Russian cosmonauts Yuri Gudzenko and Sergei Krikalev. Since then, 290 unique visitors have visited the station from 26 countries, many returning on multiple flights. Initial expeditions lasted 4 months or more, with the now traditional 6-month crew rotation becoming established around 3 to 4 years later. Over 4,000 science experiments have been conducted over that time, and 277 spacewalks have been performed, including the 10 prior to the arrival of Expedition 1 to construct it. These include an excursion earlier this week by 2 Roscosmos cosmonauts, Sergei Ryzhikov and Alexei Zubritsky. The pair conducted Spacewalk 65, in which they installed experiments and conducted maintenance tasks, including the relocation of a control box for the European robotic arm. And if you feel like you've missed some of those key moments, don't worry, there's a brand new toy made just for you. 2 NASA contractors, Ben Feist and David Charney, have spent the past few years compiling a new interactive website in their spare time that lets you revisit and explore any moment during the station's past 25 years of operation. The pair first brought us the Apollo in Real Time resource, which celebrated the 50th anniversary of the first moon landing. On this new resource, ISS in Real Time, you can revisit thousands of photos, videos, audio communications, and more on a timeline that covers over 9,000 days of mission data. There's a spacefaring nation that's notably been missing from the International Space Station: China. Due to political tensions with the US, the country was barred from participating in the ISS, so instead, they got to work on their own space station. And just this week, China launched its 10th crew to the Tiangong space station, and they're due to arrive just before this video is published. This was the 16th crewed spaceflight for the Shenzhou program, which has continuously occupied China's orbiting outpost since June of 2021. Shenzhou 21 is commanded by Zhang Lu, who previously visited the station as part of the Shenzhou 15 crew almost 3 years ago. He's joined by flight engineer Wu Fei, who became the youngest Chinese astronaut, or taikonaut, to fly at the age of 32. Payload specialist Zhang Honzhang completes the trio. He's a new energy researcher at the Dalian Institute of Chemical Physics, who will conduct some self-designed experiments during their crew rotation. The 3 will conduct 27 experiments in total, including China's first study of mammals in orbit. 4 mice will accompany the crew to study the effects of microgravity and enclosed spaces on the animals, and then return to Earth with the current crew. The Shenzhou 20 crew will depart the station in early November after a handover ceremony and about a week together. They're currently expected to land at the Dongfeng landing site in North China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region around 12:30 UTC on November 5th. During his most recent stay, Commander Chen Dong became the first Chinese astronaut to spend over 400 days in space. He also earned another distinction for the most spacewalks conducted by a taikonaut when he took his 6th outing in August. His crew also matched the record of 4 spacewalks, first set by Shenzhou 15, adding further protection against space debris. Depending on their departure date, they may even beat the record for the longest single mission duration, currently set at 192 days by Shenzhou 18 last year. China and Pakistan have also begun the selection process of Pakistani astronauts who will train alongside their Chinese colleagues, one of whom will become the first foreign astronaut to visit the Tiangong space station. From space stations, we go to space science, starting with the James Webb Space Telescope, which had been suffering from slightly blurred vision as of late. But recently, two young scientists have quietly sharpened our gaze on the universe. The researchers at the University of Sydney have developed a software calibration system called Aperture Masking Interferometry Generative Observations, or AMIGO. The system was designed to correct a subtle blurring effect that was affecting one of the precision instruments on board the James Webb Space Telescope. The problem lies in the Space Observatory's Aperture Masking Interferometer, or AMI. This is the only Australian-designed instrument on board, and it combines light from multiple mirror segments to achieve those ultra-high-resolution images of distant stars, exoplanets, and galaxies. Early into the mission, scientists discovered that faint distortions in the detector electronics were slightly softening those images. To fix it, the team essentially reversed the effect on the ground. The AMIGO solution uses machine learning and simulations to model how charge migrates between pixels on the images and digitally reverses that distortion without touching the hardware. As a result, this clever patch of code has now brought Webb's vision into even sharper focus. Back on Earth, China has unveiled a different kind of ground-based telescope that will give us a new eye on the sun. The world's first mid-infrared solar magnetic field telescope, called AIMS, will make accurate infrared magnetic field measurements of the sun and completed its final acceptance review last week. The project began development 10 years ago and has now officially been switched on. Situated 4,000 meters high in the Qinghai province of northwest China, the facility can now directly detect the sun's magnetic field with unprecedented precision. AIMS was developed by the Chinese Academy of Sciences using homegrown infrared instruments. It's a key step in predicting solar storms and a major leap for Chinese solar physics research. Its first observations are said to have already captured solar flares in stunning detail, so we'll be keeping a keen eye out for those images. Now we'll take a look at some other stories across space, starting from China. This week, launch provider Space Pioneer showed a video that shows the testing of a release mechanism for a stack of 36 Starlink-style flat-packed satellites. These will be launched aboard the company's forthcoming Tiangong 3 vehicle, a launcher similar in size and capacity to the Falcon 9. The company recently delayed its maiden launch until November, performing an additional static fire test of the first stage from its floating platform near Haiyang. Like the Falcon 9, the company plans to recover and refly its first stage boosters, but not for its debut flight. Elsewhere in China, CAS Space has now completed the development and testing of its ground infrastructure at the company's dedicated launch pad within the Zhochuan Satellite Launch Center. This video shows the company's Lijian 2, or Connecticut 2, which was raised vertical during testing of the transport erector and other equipment. At 53 meters tall, this vehicle is a bit smaller in height and diameter than the Falcon 9, with roughly half the payload to orbit, depending on the configuration. Initial flights will be expendable, with plans to introduce a reusable variant by 2028. Like the Tiangong 3, this launch has also been delayed from its initial plans to lift off in September, but it's set to carry the first Shenzhou, or Lightship cargo vehicle, to the Tiangong space station when it debuts before the end of the year. Next, we move to Palmdale, California, where Lockheed Martin's X-59 silently took its maiden flight this week on October 28th. With the US government in shutdown and minimal fanfare around its debut, you'd be forgiven for missing this historic first test flight, which was kind of the idea in a way. Let me explain. The mission is part of NASA's Low Boom Flight Demonstrator program using Quiet Supersonic Technology, or QUEST. The objective is to demonstrate technologies that dramatically reduce the loud sonic boom produced by conventional supersonic flight. Instead, you should only hear a sonic thump on the ground. The magic of silencing sonic booms is in the aircraft's shape. It has a unique needle nose design optimized to prevent shock waves from coming together, creating that loud boom. The pilot also uses an external vision system in the cockpit because the nose blocks their forward view. QUEST is powered by a single General Electric F414 jet engine, the same type that powers US Navy's Super Hornets. On this first flight, the aircraft left Air Force Plant 42, remaining at subsonic speed and a moderate altitude of around 3,600 meters to test out aircraft handling and systems. It then landed at NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center near Edwards Air Force Base. Later flights will progressively increase in altitude and speed up to Mach 1.4, eventually flying over several communities around 2028. The broader goal is to collect real flight data on noise levels, aerodynamics, and public response to later inform and shape regulations for supersonic travel over land. Though it took a relatively quiet first flight, we hope it ends up making a big noise in the future of supersonic travel. This weekend launches featured 4 Starlink launches, lifting another 113 Starlink V2 mini satellites into low Earth orbit. 2 of these missions occurred from Vandenberg, and that turnaround between missions broke the record for shortest time between launches from Space Launch Complex 4 East in California. Now, if you remember from our last space traffic report, we mentioned that SpaceX had broken their turnaround record at that pad, and, well, it happened again this week, with the new record time now being reduced by 8.5 hours. SpaceX has been trying to lower the maintenance and reduce the turnaround time from its launch pads for a few years now. And for a long time, Space Launch Complex 40 in Florida was the winner. And it is still the winner. But now with this latest record, SpaceX's Vandenberg teams are just 3 hours away from the Florida record. I wonder if they have an internal race going on for that. But it's not just the launch pad that broke a turnaround record, because the marine assets also need to be turned around and redeployed for each launch. According to SpaceX's Vice President of Launch, Kiko Donchev, to get this quick turnaround, the drone ship ended up arriving at the landing zone just 15 seconds before the start of propellant load. Really cutting it close. As we outlined earlier, this week was also notable for the debut launch of Japan's HTV-X cargo spacecraft and the launch of another crew rotation mission to the Tiangong space station from China. The launches will keep on coming next week, with several Starlink launches expected from SpaceX. The company also aims to launch the Bandwagon 4 rideshare mission from the Cape, which will include a return of the booster back to the Cape. So if you're in the area, expect some sonic booms. Another launch expected from Cape Canaveral is ULA's Atlas V, carrying the Viasat 3 F2 satellite into geosynchronous transfer orbit. This will be the last planned launch of Atlas V for a commercial customer that isn't Kuiper nor Starliner, and the last time that this rocket is launching into GTO. India will also be launching its Launch Vehicle Mark III rocket with the GSAT-7R military communications satellite on board, headed to geosynchronous transfer orbit. And Ariane 6 is also on tap for next week, carrying the European Space Agency's Sentinel-1D Earth observation satellite into sun-synchronous orbit. And we'll even have an Electron by Rocket Lab from New Zealand on the Nation God Navigates mission, carrying another IQPS synthetic aperture radar satellite. As usual, here's your weekly warning that there may be a few last-minute launches from China that could move around in the schedule. So as always, we recommend that you go to nextspaceflight.com or download the app on your phone so you can stay up to date with your space traffic. And that's your weekly update of spaceflight news. I'm Alicia Siegel for NSF. Hope you have a beautiful Halloween, and we'll see you all again next week to recap this week in spaceflight.